Disclaimer: this content is intended for a mature audience only. Viewer discretion is advised. The night was silent, yet the silence felt heavier than usual, like it was hiding something beneath its stillness. The faint hum of the ceiling fan was the only sound that dared to move in the darkness of the room. My husband lay beside me, his breathing steady, deep, unbothered by the weight that pressed against my chest. I turned my gaze toward the window, watching the faint shimmer of moonlight trace patterns against the curtain, while inside me, an ache I could neither name nor dismiss quietly stirred. He was there, close enough for me to sense him, though he had said nothing yet. His presence was quiet but undeniable, a shadow that carried both warmth and danger. I told myself not to look, not to acknowledge him, not to let the fire I felt spark into something that could never be undone. Yet, there was a pull, something more than simple companionship, more than friendship, more than what the world would call right. It was a current, slow but unstoppable, tugging me closer to the edge. My husband's hand rested near mine, innocent, trusting, his love pure in its constancy. And yet, in that very purity, I felt a loneliness I could not explain. A loneliness that seemed to whisper that something was missing, something unspoken. The heart does not always follow rules, and in the quiet of that room, mine was already betraying him with its restless beat. The other man, his eyes carried a question, one he did not voice. It lingered in the air between us, heavy, dangerous, yet intoxicating. His nearness made the air denser, like every breath I took was marked by his presence. I wanted to move, to escape the pull, but my body betrayed me, remaining still, caught between loyalty and longing. Every second stretched like eternity, each heartbeat louder than the last, until the silence became unbearable. He did not touch me. Not yet. But the possibility hung there, so vivid, so close, I could almost feel it. My mind screamed for restraint, but my heart betrayed me with its trembling hope. And then, as though the night itself held its breath, I felt the faintest shift. The beginning of something I could not stop. My chest tightened, torn between fear and desire. Would I resist, or would I surrender to what I knew could never be forgiven? The answer waited in the shadows of the next breath. The air in the room seemed to thicken as the night stretched on, the weight of what was unsaid pressing harder than any spoken word could. I lay there, motionless, caught between two worlds, one built on vows and promises, the other on an unspoken yearning I dared not name aloud. My husband shifted slightly in his sleep, his arm brushing against mine with unconscious tenderness. That touch, so familiar, should have anchored me. Instead, it only reminded me of the ache that had grown quietly inside me, an ache I had never dared to confront until now. The man at the edge of the bed, him. He wasn't a stranger to me, though I sometimes wished he were. His laughter, his silences, the way he noticed details my husband never did, those things had carved their place in my heart over time. He was steady where my husband was distracted, patient where my husband hurried. And yet, I had never asked for this closeness. It had arrived slowly, like water seeping through cracks, until it filled the spaces I thought were unbreakable. I remembered the first time I had caught his eyes lingering too long on mine. It was not hunger I saw there, but something gentler, something that disarmed me. It was the kind of gaze that says, I see you, even in the quiet corners you think no one notices. That look had stayed with me, haunting me in the nights when loneliness pressed against my chest. And now, here he was, his presence a whisper in the dark, an answer to a question I had never spoken aloud. My breath grew shallow, betraying me, as though my body was already confessing what my lips refused to. I wanted to believe I was stronger than this, that love was enough to shield me, but love, at least the kind I had lived in, had grown fragile with time. Perhaps it was routine that dulled it, or perhaps it was me, changing in ways I did not understand. And so, I found myself caught in this delicate storm, between the life I promised and the life I secretly longed for. He did not move closer, but I could feel his restraint like a fragile wall between us. I wondered, Was he fighting the same war inside? Did his heart race as mine did? Did he too wonder what it would mean if the silence finally shattered? The thought alone sent a tremor through me, a dangerous thrill I could not extinguish. The night held us there, bound by silence, by breath, by everything that might yet happen, and everything we both feared if it did. It was strange how the heart kept its own memory, carrying echoes of moments long past and replaying them when silence pressed too hard. As I lay between loyalty and temptation, I remembered the early days of my marriage. My husband and I had been radiant then, drunk on youth and the belief that love alone could hold a lifetime together. He would write me little notes, tuck them into my bag, kiss me like time was running too fast. But somewhere along the years, those gestures had faded into routine. The love was still there, solid, dependable, but it no longer burned. And then there was him. His presence in my life had not been sudden, but gradual, like the tide rolling in quietly until one day you realize the shore is gone. I met him at a time when I was yearning for someone to notice the unspoken parts of me. A conversation over coffee had turned into laughter. Laughter into trust. Trust into something dangerous. He saw the fractures I didn't admit even to myself, and instead of turning away, he stayed. That was how it began, not with fire, but with a gentle warmth that never left. Now, as he sat there in the half-light of my room, I could almost hear the weight of his restraint. His silence wasn't empty, it was full, overflowing with everything neither of us dared to say. Did he lie awake at night as I did, wondering how far this would go before it broke us both? Did he imagine, as I sometimes did, what life would look like if the line we danced around was ever crossed? I felt the conflict carve itself deeper inside me. To love one man and long for another, what kind of heart betrays itself this way? I wanted to tell myself it was only loneliness, only a fleeting weakness, but the truth was crueler. This wasn't temporary. This was real, dangerous, undeniable. And still, beneath all the turmoil, there was guilt, or at least, what should have been guilt. Yet, it wasn't sharp enough to cut me away from him. It lingered softly, almost powerless, like a distant warning I was too far gone to hear. My husband slept beside me, peaceful, unaware, his trust a shield I no longer deserved. And there, in the quiet darkness, another man's nearness reminded me of everything I had tried not to feel. One wrong word, one movement, one surrender, that was all it would take. And still, neither of us moved. The night seemed endless, as though time itself conspired to trap us in this fragile, unbearable stillness. My husband's steady breathing was the rhythm of the room, grounding, innocent, unknowing. Yet it was the quiet weight of him, sitting so close, yet still untouched, that made every heartbeat inside me feel louder, sharper, almost unbearable. The air between us was no longer empty, it pulsed, alive with a question neither of us dared answer. I closed my eyes, but that only made his presence stronger. My skin seemed to remember the shape of his nearness, the way his gaze lingered even when words did not. My mind fought for reason, reminding me of vows, of promises, of loyalty owed. But my heart had its own voice, whispering of a loneliness that had never been filled, of a longing that was quietly drowning me. How could something so wrong feel like the one thing that made me truly seen? I felt him shift slightly, a subtle movement, nothing more, but enough to steal my breath. The restraint in his posture was almost more dangerous than a touch would have been. He was holding back, and in that restraint, I felt the depth of everything he wanted but would not claim. His silence was not avoidance, it was devotion, in its own broken form. And that paradox, his refusal to act, yet his undeniable presence, pulled me further into the storm. My thoughts tangled, spinning with memories. I remembered the way he once looked at me across a crowded room, how in that fleeting second I felt chosen, seen, alive. I remembered how he listened to my silences, how he filled them with warmth instead of questions. Those small things had built into this moment in the dark, where every breath felt like temptation, and every second stretched into forever. I turned slightly, careful not to wake the man beside me, but enough to see him, this other man, this shadow that had become a flame. Our eyes met, just for a heartbeat, and in that glance, the world shifted. It was not a touch. It was not a word. But it was a confession, raw, trembling, undeniable. My chest tightened, and I wondered if he saw the same truth in me. And then the silence grew heavier, almost unbearable, as though the night itself demanded a choice. One more second of restraint, or the surrender that would change everything. The line between us trembled, so fragile it could break with the faintest breath. The silence broke, not with a touch, but with a sound. My husband shifted in his sleep, murmuring my name in a dream, his hand brushing against mine with a kind of unconscious devotion that pierced straight through me. For a moment, the weight of his trust pulled me back, anchoring me in a place I thought I could no longer stand. But then, when my gaze lifted again, he was still there, watching, waiting, the quiet storm that refused to pass. And I realized with a shiver that it wasn't only my heart at risk. His was, too. For the first time, I saw the fragility in his eyes. He wasn't simply a man drawn by forbidden desire, he was someone carrying his own loneliness, his own ache. In the shadows of the room, his silence cracked, and I caught a glimpse of what he had never said aloud, that he loved me. Not in fleeting glances or stolen moments, but in a way that had been growing, steady, patient, impossible to bury. The realization startled me. I had told myself this was temptation, a dangerous spark that could be smothered with enough willpower. But this was something deeper, something far more dangerous. He didn't just want me. He needed me, in the same way I had secretly begun to need him. My chest tightened, torn between two men who each loved me in ways so different, yet both so real. My husband's love was safe, a house with solid walls. But his love, it was a fire, one that threatened to consume me but made me feel alive in ways I had forgotten. And standing at the edge of that fire, I felt the terrifying truth, I might already belong to it. I should have turned away. Closed my eyes. Pretended this moment had never happened. But instead, I whispered his name into the silence, not loud enough for my husband to stir, but just enough for him to hear. Just enough to admit, without admitting, that I felt it too. His eyes widened, just slightly, as though he had been holding his breath for years and had only now been given permission to exhale. And in that fragile instant, the world tilted. Nothing had been spoken, nothing had been done, and yet the weight of that whisper changed everything. We had not crossed the line. But the line itself was no longer where it once had been. The whisper lingered in the air like smoke, fragile and irreversible. For a long, aching moment, he did not move, only looked at me with an intensity that burned and broke me all at once. His hand twitched, as though he wanted to reach for me but feared the weight of what it would mean. My husband's steady breathing beside me was a reminder, a tether to the life I had built, the vows I had once spoken with trembling certainty. And between the two men, I felt my heart pulled apart, torn by truths I had hidden even from myself. Finally, he leaned closer, not to touch, but to speak. His voice was low, ragged with restraint. I can't keep this inside anymore. His words trembled in the darkness, not loud enough to wake the man beside me, but strong enough to shatter the silence we had both hidden behind for too long. I love you. I've tried not to, but I do. And it's killing me. The world tilted with the weight of his confession. My breath caught, my chest tightening until I thought I might break. All the stolen glances, the unspoken moments, the heavy silences, they had not been illusions. He had carried them too. And now, hearing him speak the truth aloud, I felt both relief and devastation. I can't, I whispered back, though the words felt like glass in my mouth. I can't, but I want to. My eyes burned, and I turned away, staring into the shadows of the ceiling. My husband stirred faintly but did not wake, his trust a heavy ache pressing down on me. And then, the twist, the moment I hadn't expected. He rose quietly from where he sat, his shadow moving toward the door. For 1 second, I thought he was leaving forever, walking away from the storm we had almost unleashed. But he paused, his hand on the doorframe, his voice breaking once more. "I'll walk away if you ask me to. But if you don't, one day, I'll come back. And when I do, you'll have to choose." And then he was gone, swallowed by the night. The room felt colder, emptier, though my husband still slept beside me. I lay in the silence, trembling, knowing nothing had happened, and yet everything had changed. My heart beat against my ribs, torn between safety and fire, between loyalty and the truth I could no longer deny. The night had ended. But the choice it left behind had only just begun. The night passed slowly, though it felt like I had lived a lifetime in its silence. By the time dawn painted the edges of the curtains with pale gold, I had not closed my eyes once. My husband stirred beside me, stretching with the ease of someone whose sleep had been deep and unbroken. He smiled faintly in his half-wakefulness, pressing a soft kiss to my shoulder before rising, unaware of the storm that had unfolded while he dreamed. I watched him move about the room, his presence steady, dependable, almost ordinary in its simplicity. And for the first time, I realized how fragile ordinary could feel. The man I married loved me with a quiet certainty, but somewhere along the way, I had forgotten how to meet him in that space. The truth that had ignited inside me last night, dangerous, consuming, had not simply been about another man. It had been about me, about the parts of myself I had silenced, waiting for someone to awaken them. The other man was gone, but his absence was louder than his presence had ever been. Every corner of the room seemed to echo with what he had said, with the promise that one day he might return. I knew then that love is not a single thread, it is a tapestry of choices, some made, some abandoned, some left to haunt us forever. Later that morning, as I poured coffee for my husband, I looked at him differently. Not with the same blind devotion I once had, nor with the restless hunger of last night, but with a kind of clarity. He was my anchor, my history, my vow. Yet I also knew I could no longer pretend that the restless part of me, the one that longed to be seen and chosen, did not exist. I didn't tell him what happened, or nearly happened. Some truths remain unspoken, not out of cowardice but because they would destroy more than they could ever heal. Instead, I chose to carry it quietly, letting it reshape me in ways I could not yet name. For now, my life remained the same on the surface, routine, familiar, but inside, something irreversible had shifted. And perhaps that was the real climax, not a touch, not a betrayal, but the awakening of a truth I could no longer deny. I had been seen. I had been loved, dangerously, deeply, by another. And I had to live with the knowledge that my heart was no longer whole in one place. As the day unfolded, my husband laughed about something small, his voice light and easy. I smiled too, but behind my smile lingered the echo of the words whispered in the night. Someday, he would come back. And when he did, would no longer be able to hide behind silence. For now, I chose the life before me. But deep inside, I knew, the story was not over. Because some loves don't end, they wait.